Nick Hannon of Sons of Alpha Centauri and Yawning Sons and Alpha Cat and the various many collaborations. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome.
Good afternoon and good morning. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. It is nice to, as you said, we have been in touch for a long time. It is nice to finally speak face to face, if not in person. So
thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you taking the time. Let's jump right in with Push. The new album seems like a good place to start, right? It's out.
Right on.
It's out tomorrow. Yes, on Exile on Mainstream. And congratulations on working with Andreas. I consider he is one of few people who his taste is utterly trustable as far as I'm concerned. So that's quite an endorsement in my eyes to be working with Exile on Mainstream.
It's a privilege, absolutely. And you know, when I first rolled out the idea to him, he had purchased Continuum, so he was into what we were doing, and it was a little bit hard to position where we would pitch this record actually, because it's a little bit different to what we've done before. So props to him for taking it on board.
Really, a little different, you say?
Yeah.
Congratulations also on your understatement, because it is in fact quite different than what you've done before. And and I don't think of various sort of heavier bands. You kind of know what you're going to get going into the prospect of a new release, right? Some people have their thing, some people don't. And to a degree, I expect some sense of atmosphere. I expect it to usually be instrumental, but Sons of Alpha Centauri has never been one of those bands where it's like you're going to get this thing, especially as you've always been open to working with people outside the sort of core unit.
Yeah.
That said, do you feel like this album goes farther outside, if not your comfort zone, some established mode of working than anything you've done?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, leaving the instrumental boundaries, I think there was a point where we, as opposed to jumping straight into doing a second album after the first one, we thought we'd work with people that had developed and refined and were the innovators and purveyors of the instrumental sound a lot. And we learned and still continue to learn an immense amount from those people. But when it came to doing Push, we couldn't quite bring ourselves to, we wanted to do music that we wanted to hear ourselves. It's kind of always been the mantra, really. And growing up, we were listening to all these different genres that were all evolving and things were going on, and there was always this that sort of post-hardcore thing happening in Sacramento. So we write all of these songs, and some of them sort of slot into where we are right now, some of them slot into things that we think, well, let's just leave that there and we'll pick it up in the future. And that's the beauty of the numbers. You just kind of go, okay, well, that number doesn't really fit there, but we'll come back to that. And then eventually Pushes is like an amalgam of recordings that we'd done, or songs that we'd written, and then we had a theme, and then we could build around that. So the first session we did with Push was with Steve on drums. And we've managed to build an identity around it. Jonah came in, he recorded the vocals, and then we had an identity which we could build the album around. So it wasn't just a case of, right, we're going to sit down and write a record of this style. It was a case of we had a theme and it developed up, and that's how quite a few SOAC records kind of come together sometimes.
Okay. What was the... Okay, so Jonah... First session with Steve on drums, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Where was that? And when
So it was
was that?
that was in the UK,
Okay.
and that was probably around 2016, 17.
Okay.
So
So a while, and already this
yeah,
album is 5+ years, 6+ years in progress. Figure between the writing and all that.
that's the development arc on some SOAC projects are quite long. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. At what point were you like, oh, Jonah from Far is gonna? How did that happen?
That we didn't want to. I think when we thought about overlaying vocals, which is a huge step, we were like, don't really want to go out and do the vocals ourselves just yet, because if it doesn't work, that whole sort of opportunity will implode on itself. If it didn't work for us, you know, it's something that we're teeing up and we're excited about, but it didn't feel right. Whereas when in like the late 90s, when I was doing my first band, which was with Marlon as well, we had a vocalist called Mark Wood in my first band, and he sounded a lot like Jonah. So the music that I'd kind of written then, it was you know, all metal kind of stuff. I knew that some of the music and the themes that I developed even when I was like 15, 16, 17 would work with that kind of sound, with that kind of those kind of Jonah vocals, because Mark was using that style of vocal. So when we started to bring together that theme sort of again, and it all sort of started to pour out of myself and Marlon, then I thought, well, I know that style of vocals does work. So it's pretty cool to have, you know, recordings and ideas that we'd not, you know, or themes that we developed from like 98, 99 to like bring them forward 20 years and be like, oh, okay, this we're writing in this style again. It's obviously evolved a lot more, but we know that these vocals kind of work because we had these kind of vocals in a previous band. So immediately just sort of the mind just leapt like, Jonah, let's see if he'd be up for it. And thankfully he was.
How did you get in touch with him?
He is a really sort of dynamic worker. So he's still like heavily involved in building his own community. Like he's got like a community of people that he works with, and that he invites people to listen to his music. He still does like sort of gigs, acoustic gigs, going and meeting people. He wants to sort of build like an audience in a very organic way. And not only do I gravitate towards that, and I've followed him since, you know, Far and through One Line Drawing and everything, but it enabled us the opportunity to engage with him and have those conversations without it being through, you know, social media or anything like that. So it was a really great way to approach what was a big thing for us. And I think him recording a whole record, it didn't start out to be a whole record, it was going to be a few songs. And then when we saw how it went, it was like, oh, the record just sort of fell into place. But it's kind of a deal for him as well. But he's very much like, you know, this is, you know, your guys' band, and, you know, I'm just creating that extra dimension of vocals, and, you know, we think it's worked out sort of really well. So, you know, super fortunate.
Interesting. You know, did he go to the UK for that first session then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was in the.
Okay. So everybody traveled for this one.
Yeah. So, you know, it was great. It was again, once you've got that initial template, you can build on it. But you need to have those whites of the eyes conversations. And, you know, one of the music videos that will hopefully come out is you can see Jonah, Marlon, myself, you know, Dan in the studio just trying to make it work, because, you know, he's overlaying, you know, themes and ideas lyrically on top of music, and it's that whole dimension that we've never been able to tap into before for a whole album for SOAC. So that first session was critical, and, you know, but it was a really good vibe, and it just gelled perfectly. So, you know, we're stoked on that. So yeah, but all together in one place made sense.
Is that take me through that process then of like taking the themes that you have, the instrumental themes, and sort of carving verses and choruses, right? A more structured approach for vocals out of them, at least in, you know, in some parts.
Yeah, it was, the first record was everything that we had in our heads. So we had 35 songs that we'd written. We took 12 of them, and they were all different types of song. Like some of them were big build-up songs, some of them were riff songs, some of them were progressive songs. And we realized that migrating towards vocals as we evolved, that you would have to have a bit more of, you had to create the opportunity for the vocals to sit front and center. And you just can't have just ongoing build-ups forever and ever, as much as we love all that stuff. And so we created a bit more sort of dynamic and flow around the riffs, as opposed to them being, you know, quite angular and being like, here's the A and here's the B. They would flow and they would build in themselves, but they could sit back so the vocals could sit up front, because they need, you know, there needs to be the harmonies, there needs to be those melodies, those vocals that can hook onto that. And you can't do that if it's just crazy, you know, epic sort of riff building all the time. It just didn't quite fit. So we have sort of modulated our sound to accommodate, I think, and that accommodation has been a learning process as well, and it's helped to regulate, I think, as well, because otherwise you end up with songs that were 5 minutes and they become 8 minutes, and then they become like 15 minutes, and that's cool in itself, right, if you're going in that direction. But to take it and make it shorter, that is really challenging. I'd say yeah,
it's a huge shift in dynamic. Huge.
Yeah.
And I can see, were there points at which, or maybe even some songs where you were just like, this isn't working, you know, and sort of put that aside, because of that, because, you know, something doesn't work, like going from a linear to more traditional verse chorus.
Pretty much. So Return Trip on Continuum could have had vocals pitched against it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, you know, a 11-minute song, and that was one where we just went into it. And, you know, we did record some vocals, and at some stage we might release like the, you know, stripped back version, but it was just too much to strip back. And when we had that record mixed, the start, you know, the production that was coming out from Aaron Harris was not really going to mirror the production that you might need for a vocal track.
Right.
But it's about having all of that opportunity, you know, having that ability to take those tracks and go, actually, this is best to sit here as a theme in an album, mm-hmm, as opposed to, you know, having to tailor it all, because you've got to squeeze it all in. And that one of the big things for Marlon is creating the album journey and creating the album concept. And so being able to move those tracks to where they fit best within that album theme and concept is really important, and sort of worked out with how we were doing the vocals with Jonah, and moving tracks that you could have sung on tracks on Continuum. So Saturn, that's on Push, that was originally penned for Continuum as well. So that was the first batch of tracks that ended up working with vocals. So some of them were recorded at around a similar time.
Okay. It's a grand project you have here, Nick. This is very big, very expansive, I guess, right? Because I mean, think about, you know, one of the things I like about Sons of Alpha Centauri, man, is you don't do it small. You know what I mean? Like, you're not making it easy on yourselves.
No.
I mean,
no.
You know, it's you guys don't just make a record.
No. And I think there is that no, you're right. It's not. And there's just this, I think there is an appetite for us to really get into, you know, the more sort of expansive, longer story arc stuff.
Right.
And, you know, where you can have like instant gratification. And I've seen a lot of bands that have, you know, they've burnt out quite quickly, from where it's been release a record, tour, release another record, tour. And it's, sure, and you see those bands and they're phenomenal at what they do, and I really enjoy that. And then equally to step aside and try and do something which is more akin to, I don't know, maybe if you say like you know, what they're doing with like what they did with like Game of Thrones and what they did with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And just, it's a real slow build, but you build it all and try and integrate it all and try and build that sort of integrated massive story arc. That's exciting for us because it keeps everything interlinked and relevant. So if we're going to re-release something, or if we're going to try and keep our music, you know, because we still like playing older tracks as much as newer tracks, and for people to get into the band now, then to hear that sort of 20 years of story arc is great, but there is another 20 years planned, and you know that commitment is significant. But we think that, you know, it's a slow builder, but we're not making it easy on ourselves. But equally, I wouldn't want it to be, you know, a risk of burning out and just throwing all of those ideas in there too much. And you know, with some of the guys at the moment, for example, we have had to say, you know, building it all up, that it would be, we'll have a burst of activity and then we will go back to try and getting it all in place, and then another burst of activity. And it's just trying to keep people captivated and intrigued as well, because, you know, there's not an awful lot of mysticism left in a lot of things. People are quite expressive, you know, and will show everything to everyone. And sometimes it's nice to hold that thing back. And then when it comes out, it's a nice surprise. And those surprises are quite, you know, refreshing. And I think that's important to us as well.
Push is a surprise. So
yeah.
Cheers. Kudos. How did working with Mitch Wheeler come about?
So that was when we did the first 3 tracks with Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, you know, he is a phenomenal drummer, and me and Marlon met him. He played in the local scene here in Sittingbourne and Swale and Sheerness since the early 90s. So he's quite he's a bit older than we are, and we've seen him in bands, and he was like a hardcore drummer, but he moved into like more classic rock drumming.
Mm-hmm.
And he found his comfort spot, I think, around, you know, jamming, progressive build-ups, and he loved that. And with the 3 songs that we did, he gave absolutely everything. And he kind of said to me, he was like, I've given everything I can on this, but this probably isn't the record for me. Mm-hmm. And you know, and that's fair enough, because he's been, you know, with us since, you know, 2004, and but he said, you know, maybe this could be an opportunity to try something different that might give it that extra boost. And that was pretty honest of him to say that, because, you know, it's not an easy thing to say. But he was just kind of like, compared to other things that were going on with the band, and, you know, where we've been playing, you know, together, and other records that we've got going on, he was like, this is kind of where my head's at. It's not quite so much here now. And we were like, that's cool. So we knew that with Jonah on board, that there was a theme there. And in my head, the new Will Haven record had dropped, and it was just absolutely full on. And so, you know, I went to go see Will Haven, and, you know, it was like an elevator pitch, you know, just sort of like, there's Mitch Wheeler, see what he thinks. But that's how a lot of it happens. You know, you meet people and
Take
you
me
be
through
social.
that elevator pitch. Wait a second. So you did not have a prior friendship with Mitch Wheeler?
No.
Okay. Take me through that elevator pitch. Let's hear it.
Okay. So it would be something along the lines of, hi, Mitch. Nice to meet you. How you doing? Nick, real fan. And then it was something along the lines of, we're working on a record with Jonah Matranga, and we think your drumming would fit perfectly. What do you think? And we've worked on collaborations before. I can send you the records of what we've done. What do you think? And that was it. It was just kind of, you know, we're not overly exposed in terms of what we're trying to do. It was just a case of just sending people ideas, similar to what we did with Aaron, you know, for Continuum. It was like, we've got an idea, there's a theme here, we'll send you the tracks, what do you think? And I think that initial engagement approach of, you know, sending a package, it's a CD, it's a letter, just laying it out there, he, you know, he completely engaged with. And he, you know, based in Sacramento, he knew a lot of the people that were there. He could hear what we were trying to do. He'd heard some of the tracks we'd done with Steve, so he'd already heard Jonah's vocals, so he kind of knew the direction it was going to go in. And some of the tracks that we sent him were tracks that we'd sort of demoed with Steve anyway, so he could kind of hear ideas there. And he was just, yeah, totally in there, just clicked in. And he locked in to record in Sacramento with Lance Jackman, who is also, he's an 847, you know, and loads of other cool stuff that he does. So those two just sort of just gravitated towards it, owned it, and recorded it. And it's good that they did, because they recorded just as the world was going into lockdown. Yeah. So yeah, we were fortunate with that.
You went to Sacramento too, or no?
I would have liked to have done, and I could have done, but it was just as the UK was just heading into it. Europe was just heading into it. And I think the US was maybe 3 or 4 weeks behind at the time. So he recorded mid-March, I think. We went into lockdown here in late March. So it was nick of time. Yeah, it really was in terms of that. So yeah, we were fortunate in that respect. And it was that energy as well was really captured as well, because, you know, Will Haven had been on tour in the UK probably in 2019. So in actual fact, it was quite rapid in the way it moved.
All right.
Yeah.
To go back to sort of bringing Mitch in and to have Stevie leave or you know, at least sit out. Do you feel at all like the sort of open nature of what Sons of Alpha Centauri does? Do you feel like maybe that enables that conversation a little bit? Like, it's not every band where someone says, I'm not feeling this album, I'm gonna take a seat, right? I mean, if you're on the album cycle and you have to be in the studio on this day so that you can go on tour this day for the next however many months, you can't really do that, right? No. So you know, the fact that Sons of Alpha Centauri is more open, do you think that enables that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it is quite transitional, but not like so, you know, myself and Marlon, you know, formed it in 01, and Steve,
happy 20th anniversary.
Yeah, it was, last month.
Yeah.
And that transition has helped, and all of the experimentation and the collaboration probably in an early stage around, you know, 06, 07, 08, sort of, that helped make it more fluid in that respect. But we stepped it up a gear with the vocals, and, you know, and the honest conversations that can be had as well when you've played, you know, with someone for 15 years. And, you know, they've been on they've got their own journey as well as a musician. And, you know, and Steve had been in a lot of reputable, you know, local hardcore bands that I loved. And, you know, he'd absolutely gone for it. And I think to see him coming back round to that again, he was like, not 20 years, not after 20 years.
Right.
He was kind of like, this is where I see my journey arc going. And, you know, we're all local, and we're all sort of we grew up in a location where it's big enough for everyone to do their own thing, but small enough to know what everyone's doing in a nice kind of way. So he kind of has gone off to like play, you know, in a more sort of surfy kind of, you know, jam kind of 60s band, which he's doing at the moment. He does brilliantly, and we go see his music, and, you know, we're all still friends, and it's cool. So it's not a problem. And, you know, there's a lot of music that he's still recorded that will probably form another really long development album arc at some stage, and be like, okay, cool. So, and it will have that more traditional vibe about it. But yeah, it kind of makes sense. And you kind of got to respect if you're doing it over that period of time, that people change, their priorities change, and they transition. And I think that's why a lot of bands sort of burn out or implode or whatever, is there isn't necessarily that adult conversation that comes with that transition. So I think that's quite good, and as we've tried to, and always will, accommodate as much as possible people's, you know, musical values and preferences, and I think this record has been a embodiment of that, which has been cool.
You mentioned you know, sort of seeing the bigger picture and thinking about album arcs and albums as arcs. How many various Sons of Alpha Centauri albums are in the works, and how planned out are those arcs?
I suppose if you had to take the debut, probably after that it probably split into three. One was going off in this kind of the Continuum Buried Memories push arc, which is the heavier, darker side, and then another arc is probably the more ambient, chilled stuff, which, you know, when Gary first came over, he was going to work with us on the second SOAC album then.
Gary RC,
that out, that's right, yeah. And so that kind of went into its own side of things. And then there's the riff rock instrumental Puritan side of things, which we sort of obviously developed and built on working with, you know, Treasure Cat and Karma and so much stuff going on there. So I would say it's sort of split into three, with the sort of the ambience interconnected it, and we've really pushed that the no pun intended, but we've really driven the Continuum sort of Buried Memories sort of pish side of the thread. But we will obviously be looking at the other ones a bit more, I think. So yeah, that's there's probably like three arcs, I think, and each of them are at different stages of development, and it's about trying to create that expanse of attracting people from, you know, one to the other and from the other to the one, because we don't really want to sit in any one particular location, if you know what I mean. We don't want to be like just an instrumental riff rock band or a sort of progressive post metal band or anything like that. It's all part of that one universe, I suppose, which is requires a lot of critical mass to keep moving, and a lot of goodwill from people that are like, what's going on? Like, one moment there's this going on and then this is going on, but as with everything, you think, well, what would it look back on retrospectively when you see it all piecing together, and you'll be like, that should hopefully all integrate well, and people will be able to connect that together if they're into it. If no one's into it, it doesn't matter. It means something to us, so it's cool.
So, I mean, is it, you know, from outside the band, I can see sort of, or hear, as it were, what is, okay, what ties it together, right? Like, what's uniting that universe, the sort of backdrop of, in those three threads, I can hear you guys, right? To a varying degree and in varying contexts, of course.
Yeah.
What ties it together for you?
I think my friendship with Marlon is really critical, and how we've written and played music together since we were really young, and that journey that we've been on, as in, you know, we went to school, went to college, we'd get into, I don't know, everyone would get into the same record at the same time, because a record would drop, a few people would buy it on CD, everyone would share the record, everyone would get into the record, it would be everywhere at the same time. So that could be, with Marlon, for example, it could be Chaos AD by Sepultura when we were really young, or then as we got older, it could be something like, I don't know, Che, for example, you know, when that record dropped, and it was very, very quite unique, you know, in the fact that it was just, you know, a record on Man's Ruin or whatever, but everyone was listening to it at the same time because it was cool, and that's where everyone's head was at. So that journey of being into music and getting into music and listening to music and sharing all of those records, it's kind of a reflection, like a mirror image of that, I suppose. Wanting to, you know, express and you know, look back retrospectively as well as take it forward as well. And there's always sort of areas where you think, oh, I thought that band could have gone in that direction, or I thought this scene might have gone in this direction. It never quite did. There's so much happening, you know, you had all these bands happening, all these scenes happening. You just think, well, what could have happened if that had happened? That record never dropped. That's a shame, you know. And so you're looking back sort of retrospectively and sort of going through your own chronology of getting into music and listening to music, and then being able to use the internet to communicate with people, to bring all of that together, to give it another lease of life. So it's almost like a mirror image chronology of having gotten into music, gotten into different scenes, checked out different scenes, everyone listened to it together. So at one point, you know, there's a group of people that were hanging out and we were sort of just going to parties, and literally, you know, at sort of 11 o'clock, you know, a few of us would go into the kitchen, check out what was going on with the beer situation. Me and Marlon would be the guys that would go to the stereo, and I'd come in, and the CDs that I would always have religiously would be first Karma to Burn album. I would have the first Queen's album, probably something like Master of Reality or something like that. Maybe if something on Man's Ruin on CD, if I was lucky enough. And because, you know, everything had to be on mail import, you had to import a lot of this stuff, but someone else would bring something and everyone else, and that would be it. And then we'd be like, this is the music that's going to set the party up, and so everyone would be listening to it. So everyone got into it at the same time, and it was a great time. And it was a great time when everyone was listening to music at the same time. So a lot of the time, that is the journey of SOAC is sort of that growing up through the 90s at a time of, you know, some of the best music ever, really, and a great depth of some of the great best music ever. And you hear some of the 90s musicians talking about the 70s, and you know, then, you know, the generation before that, and I think the celebration of the 90s cannot be understated, you know, with all of those things, whether it be, you know, Touch and Go or Man's Ruin, you know, or Discord, or all of those things. There's so much that was going on, plus all the stuff that was happening, you know, in Europe and the UK as well. So yeah, there's so much to dig into, dive into, and reflect upon that, you know, we would never run out of ideas or things to do, I don't think.
Awesome. You mentioned earlier, and I wanted to bring it up, you know, other vocal ideas. You know, if Jonah's done this album with you guys, not necessarily not going to do another, but not necessarily going to do another. Marlon sings on the Yawning Sons record, and I heard that, and I gotta be honest, my response was like, why doesn't he just sing in the band?
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you can't pull it off, right? So is there a Sons of Alpha, is there an incarnation of Sons of Alpha Centauri that allows for that?
I think so. The short answer would be yes. I think, you know, Marlon, you know, he's been a guitarist, songwriter, and vocalist. You know, he started playing when he was 5, and he is without a doubt the highest talent that I kind of know, you know, locally, and, you know, I've known for a long time. And it's just a case of how does it work in terms of being a guitarist? And, you know, when you're a guitarist, you want to be a guitarist, and then you want to be a songwriter, and then how do you do the vocals? And then there's that conflict of having someone like me there who's also a songwriter and also writing the songs. And we never initially set out for SOAC to be just instrumental. It's just the vocals took a back seat and then never came to the fore because the songwriting and the musicianship took the front seat. And with Adrenaline Rush, that was literally the bass line from myself with Steve, you know, laying down the drum beat, and Andy. And so it gave him that space to be like, oh, there isn't actually a guitar line here so much. He could just approach it with the vocals. And so when he showed it to me, and he was like, what do you think of this with the vocals and the guitar lines, and Gary sort of sweeping ambience and the builds and the crescendos, and we were like, this is great, because in actual fact, the guitars do sit back on that song. They're loud, but they do sit back, his guitars in particular.
Yeah.
So it afforded him the ability to become front and center. And now it's about juxtapositioning. How do you do that when you've only got one guitar in SOAC, really? So we didn't want to overshadow any of the other performers, of course not, on Yawning Sons, because there's a lot of moving parts in that project. And, you know, but it was good that the response to it was so strong, because I think that's been a huge confidence boost and excites us the opportunity of what we could do moving forward with that. It's just how then we integrate it with the songwriting moving forward and what that might look like, and all the different styles that we've got as well, because that is a very particular kind of track sitting within a very particular, you know, ambiance of band. And that isn't widely reflective of, you know, if we were to go and write a really heavy progressive, you know, metal track or something, that Marlon's vocal wouldn't necessarily sit there. So again, it's sort of sitting to understand what his vocals work within, and how does that work within a pure SOAC context. But it was a really interesting, as always, you know, it's experimental, isn't it? But we think the experiment massively paid off, which was great, because it was a risk, especially with the follow-up to Ceremony. It was like, you know, don't get it wrong. You know, don't, gotta.
Did you feel that? Did you feel that pressure? Come on, you know, I mean, okay, I think you know how I feel about Ceremony to the Sunset. It is an album I have loved deeply for some time now. Did you feel pressure to follow it up, and what does that feel like in putting the material together?
I think it was a bit self-inflicted in the fact that we left it so long, and that the bringing together of the record was not so bad, I don't think, because I was able to, you know, the initial propulsion is, you know, whereas Mario's got a very low, thick, riding, driving, pumping Yawning Man bass sound. Mine is a more twangy, Joy Division-y kind of sit back and snap with the drums kind of vibe, which, you know, and that immediately sort of takes everything down into a sort of more chilled vibe. So clicking with Gary, you know, when we brought that together was critical. So, you know, he his incredible ability to generate ideas and bring them together, but they sit and lock in with the bass basically. So that bringing together the record was not, the music was not so much of a problem. It was more of just how it would compare in terms of an evolutionary step against Ceremony, because it was when we brought together Sky Island, that was the first time that we'd done it since Ceremony, or since, you know, getting together and playing, you know, very briefly in Camden, or bringing together like a sort of a demo or something like that. We did a 7-inch. So that was probably the biggest pressure, was leaving it so long, I think. And that was because of, you know, how busy, you know, we set ourselves back to do other records, but I can't understate, you know, how productive and how busy and how, you know, how much work the people in the Palm Desert do. You know, they are professionals, and that's what they do, and they work very hard across a range of stuff. So yeah, it wasn't through not wanting to. I think it was just a case of trying to get everyone's time to lock in. Yeah,
no, they're hustling out there in the desert. I mean, they're working it, and
yeah,
as well they should. How do you mentioned sort of how Sky Island evolves off of Ceremony to Sunset? How do you feel it does?
I certainly feel that the songs don't feel like they've been quite so jammed. There's the each song is quite distinct and locks in with the vocals, and the theme and the idea of each track is quite distinct. Whereas I think Ceremony sort of flows as an album. I think there are probably more sort of milestones or hooks for me in Sky Island, which was great. And, you know, we pushed the experimental sort of ambient stuff further. We pushed the production a lot further. You know, we recorded Ceremony in the space of like a week and also, and it was mixed, and it was all done on analog tape. whereas Sky Island was done digitally, basically. And so that afforded us a lot more. The production on that record was expansive and took a lot of time, and Marlon spent a lot of time working on that, as well as bringing together all the different vocals and stuff like that. So I think it definitely feels like it's an evolution, but they sit as sort of sister releases, so to speak. So for me, they've got that parity, and I think the response to the record has ensured that it's got that stability. There'll always be, I suppose, a sort of a legacy reflection for Ceremony, but Sky Island, I think you actually said was an apt kind of like it sat there with it, so to speak. It wasn't sort of night and day in terms of the differences between the two, and that was really important, because you always think this is a preserved thing, don't touch it, leave it alone, but it's a good thing. And so we wanted to do it again, and it felt right doing it again, and I think the outcome was really positive. And there was the responses and the reviews, and everyone was really positive around it. It was that, which is really important, because it is sitting under, we didn't want it to be sitting under a shadow of the debut.
How important was it to you to bring Dandy Brown, Wendy Fowler, Scott Reeder, those voices back into it?
So I mean, Gary did a lot of that. He did a lot of the work on the first record, speaking to people, bringing them on board, and it can become quite you've got to do a lot of work when you're talking about all these different people and things like that.
Logistics.
So having the logistics, and all of the stuff that goes around that, and working it all out and organizing it all. So in order for there to be that consistency, having Wendy and Scott and Mario on it was important, and then opening it up for there to be more vocals was important as well, and bringing Dandy on board. And I think it just gives it, and Matt and Marlon as well. There's a part of us that's thought, we should do more instrumental stuff, but the instrumental stuff is something that we know we can do. So in future, hopefully we'll do it again. It could be, you could have an instrumental version, and then you can have like a vocal record or an instrumental record. It enables us that flexibility now. I don't think there'll be quite as many sort of vocalists, because the logistics did slow it down quite a lot. And we were glad to get it out when we did get it out. And thanks a lot to Ripple for being so patient with us with getting it out.
You have done one show with Yawning Sons.
Yeah.
It was Desert Fest. It was 2013. I was fortunate enough to be there for it. Despite Gary's guitar trouble, that was the Yawning Sons set, right?
That's the one. Yeah. He had his guitar and his pedal were fine. There was just a lead in the back of his amp which just kept popping out, and he was looking at it and he was like, I don't know what yours. And Mario came on, and it's just one of those things. It's just one of those things. So
I got to hold his guitar while they were fixing the amp. So that was me right there.
You'll really appreciate the photos as well. They captured it really well.
No, man, it was honestly it was an honor to be there. To see that. Something really, really special to me. Continues to be. So thank you for that. I don't have a smooth transition here. Let's talk about Will from Karma to Burn.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, Will Mecum, you mentioned Karma to Burn earlier. Very early influence from you. Interestingly, the first Karma to Burn record, the one with vocals, was your album? Vocals. Okay, not Wild Wonderful Purgatory behind you?
No, it was the first one. So I got used to get mail order catalogs, and I'd seen a bit of press in the UK, and everyone at the time, we were all listening to like stuff on Roadrunner, and this stuff was coming through, and it was like, Roadrunner, okay, it's just coming through, it looks pretty cool, these guys look pretty crazy. So I purchased it, and to this day, it's still one of the greatest records ever made. In my view, it always sits there in the top 10. just because there was a version where they did it instrumentally, and then I think Roadrunner were like, no, you need to have some vocals. But when they went back and added the vocals, they added so much more. They added so much more on top of it. And, you know, I'm really fortunate that to know, you know, Nathan, Rich, and of course, you know, knowing Will, because they actually, you know, having worked with them and supported them and just sort of cared for them really over all that time, they actually gave me the statue on the front. So I've got the statue from the first debut album of the girl on the motorbikes. That sits at my house now, and that's always just a constant reminder, like a humbling reminder of, you know, the context of which I operate in, and, you know, like the fact that they are not only sort of pioneers and purveyors, but they've also, you know, to work with them has been, you know, an absolute privilege. So yeah, the first album has always been sort of number one. The drumming from Nathan, his single bass kick pedal is just so unique. And, you know, when he left and then it moved into, you know, Rob taking over, they developed more swing, and I think they had more flexibility to do what they wanted to do.
Right.
But that initial blueprint, I think, is just, you know, unstoppable. It's almost like the 90s Joy Division, really. It's just that ingrained, if, you know, just. So that was one of the things that really made me, because the bass really stood out on that record as well. So that and Peter Hook were kind of like refined that kind of twangy, trebly, in your face sort of bass sound, just because I wanted to hear it, and it was kind of a unique sound, as well as some of the low end that they had as well. So yeah, brilliant.
It's interesting because, you know, Karma to Burn in my mind defined like saying, fuck you, we're gonna do what we want.
Yeah,
right. Like that was that band's entire personality. Like Will through the years to the end. I mean, you know, and you know, much missed. I did not know him well. We spoke a few times, but much missed anyway, just for his contributions and that attitude. You know, they went so far away from that first album. Did you ever, I mean, how did you say that to them? Like, oh yeah, your first record was really, that was the one, right? Like, when these guys, when they actively rebelled against that.
Yeah, they kind of, I think with Wild Wonderful, there was that transition moment and all of the songwriting kicked in. And then with Heathen, it was just so good. It was, you know, they had almost said, well, so there's this record, and then they defined instrumental riff rock across those two records. But in Heathen, the production was just incredible. And they, you know, bringing together all the artistic concepts and whatever else. And, you know, when Will first came over in 05, 06, you know, he was, you know, a mentor really, because he was like, music's first, get the music right, everything else just comes behind. And that set up how, you know, even to this day, how I would speak, engage, and liaise with people, you know, like Mitch, just be like, here's a record, see what you think, just let us know. Like, let's not get, you know, too bogged down in, you know, like all of it's rock music at the end of the day, you know, and Will was just a Puritan when it came to that. So when we first started working with him, you know, he was completely different in terms of, he was like the structures, the way that the songs would be brought together, like the Alpha Cat stuff, you know, and he said the only other person he's played guitar with in a band besides Daniel Davis when he was doing Year Long was Marlon. And so for Marlon, you know, that's a huge privilege for him, because, you know, Will would sit there, he'd write a riff, I'd be like, my jaw would hit the floor, I'd be like, that's amazing. He'd be like, I got a million of them. And he did, you know, he had a million left. And that was the thing. It was always a case of, you know, he just had this natural gift, but that gift for writing music emanated from that kind of, I'm going to do what I'm going to do kind of attitude of writing the songs and being the guitarist and doing all of that. And he held, and that was one of the hardest things, because, you know, he held true, and that band held true, the instrumental forever idea, and that is theirs, you know, and it will all forever be theirs. They owned that. And, you know, I just think that you would never, ever ever get a record like that being released again. Whether it be the debut or whether it be, you'd probably get records that would try and emulate Heathen and, Appalachian and stuff like that. Everywhere.
Many, yeah. I mean, yes, no, that record exists. Don't worry.
Yeah,
the record of the instrumental band trying to be Karma to Burn. Yeah, that exists.
Yeah,
definitely.
And we were fortunate to capture him at a time when he took us and they took us collectively under their wing, and to have that to be able to release all the records with them, all the splits, do all the shows. That wasn't. I never will ever take that for granted, because he could have just been like, no. And they didn't. They reached out in terms of friendship. They reached out in terms of that approach, and that went through all the way through, lockdown and everything like that. I mean, I would speak to Will for two hours, probably every week, maybe sometimes twice a week. And, he was a very close friend, and he would always make sure that perspective was maintained on songwriting and everything like that. And there were a lot of people, I think, who would speak to him and just forget that he was a musician, because he was just kind of like, he just had that, don't give a, attitude, which was so refreshing and, so uniquely him. And that just poured through their music. I think that on reflection, when first invited him over, and we showed him some riffs and some ideas, and he was really collaborative. He would take those ideas and he wouldn't just be like, well, here's a load of riffs that I've written, because the Treasure Cat Choice Cuts record, which would be great to maybe try and get that back out, because there was like 15 songs on that record, and that is Will between 02 and 09, basically between Heathen and Appalachian, and Choice Cuts. And then to work with him developing that, I think that he found that sort of a unique experience, and that will always stick with us, because it was, again, that was the first time we'd ever done it, never before. He just walked out at Heathrow with Roy, and it was like, we're going to do this. Marvin was like, we were quite young at the time, like, we're going to do this. And we brought him back to where we live. It's not London, it's not a big city, it's we're quite rural. We live on an island which is off of the UK, which is an island, so it's quite isolated. And he just got into it. And then from there, once you've got that initial bonding experience and you've done music collaboratively, the floodgates opened, particularly when Karma restated. I mean, probably one of our highlights was after they played Download in 09, and we were there, and someone stood on a beehive somewhere, and just all these bees were flying around. And he came off and he was just sort of like, yeah, just need to find a way of selling records to bees and we might be a bigger band. He was just so casual about it, despite the fact there was this swarm of bees everywhere. And then the day after, we supported them at their return show to the Underworld. And there are videos, and it just exploded. People were so glad to see them and to have them back, and for us to open for them. It was incredible. And he came out and opened and said, "These are my friends, Sons of Alpha Centauri." He pinned his name and the reputation of Karma and everything to us. And so I was going to be damn sure, along with the rest of the guys in SOAC, that we were going to make sure that we do everything we could to support them, which we can and did, and will always do as much as we can.
How much has his attitude informed your own in terms of setting up Sons of Alpha Centauri as what you want it to be, and what you guys want it to be, of course, as you and Marlon, especially what you guys want it to be?
Yeah, I think massively, in terms of just being like, just do what you think you will enjoy. And I think he was the one that told me about, like, musicians, you're always going to have, he never had a great deal with labels, he's never had an awful lot of luck, but always people had always come to see his shows, but he'd always been able to build like a good rapport with bands. Like there were always bands that he loved, you know, he loved to hang out with and he loved to tour with, you know, COC and Buzz Oven and all these bands. And he was like, these bands and Clutch and stuff like that. And he said, if you build the rapport with those people and you can work with them, then you can get through tough times and you can get through difficulties that might be thrown your way, because you spend a lot of time on tour together. And, you know, he kind of laid the foundations as the first collaborator as to what was truly possible. And, you know, when he started bringing the Goat and Ear artwork in, and he created, like, with Alex von Wilding, the 4 SOAC druids. And so there's the definitive trilogy front cover of, you know, the incantation. There's like all of the tour art. You know, he was just like, just take, if you feel that you can work with someone and you believe in what you're doing and it works musically and you can be friends, then it's the possibilities are limitless. When it gets into the world of, you know, it's a business transaction or it's a deal, or, you know, there's lots of paperwork, it just doesn't work. And that's not really where SOAC are. It's not ideal, really, you know, in that, you know, we'll always make sure that if people, you know, are owed something, then that will always get sorted out. But it is based on the friendship and the, you know, and how it's meant to work in collaboration and the true spirit of, you know, being friends and working as musicians together.
Where does Sons of Alpha Centauri go next?
I think it's been a busy year and we'll probably sort of take a step back as to, I probably think, looking at all the work that we've done, I think that there's some exciting stuff that we're looking to put forward, but I think it's going to be a case of developing those other arcs, but also probably creating a version of the band that can perform, you know, live a bit more, which would be cool. And also to make sure that it's fit for purpose for the next amount of time. So, you know, coming out of everything that we've been through, it's like we need to make sure that we're ready to keep doing it more and more, because we're building, you know, an ascent, so to speak. So in terms of that, I think the next step is just sort of taking stock, what our next step might be, and hopefully being able to, like, for people to see what we've done with Push, and then see how that might transpose into, like, doing things with other concepts that we've got going on. But we want to try and make sure there isn't like 10 years between records coming out. Like the 10-year gap between the debut and Continuum was a great learning experience, but I wouldn't want to do that between Push and the next record. There needs to be, you know, a time where there's going to be that propulsion, but we don't want it to be sort of like really strenuous. And trying to work with, you know, working with people like Andreas, for example, and, you know, some of the PR people we've been working with, they genuinely care, and they're doing a lot of work that we would otherwise do, because we don't have social media, we don't push social media campaigns. So, you know, I'm about to sort of send out a load of postcards, because it's old school, right? Sending postcards to people, and that's great, but it's really,
hey man, I keep all those postcards,
intensive.
by the way.
Do you?
I have
great. That's why
every
we do
letter, all the pictures. I keep everything.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
So,
and that's kind of, you know, part of the reason why we do it, so we can focus on communicating with people in a kind of organic way that we can relate to, because I just can't relate to it, really. You know, I used to get, you know, magazines through that had been written by the people like Raging Speedhorn and stuff like that, and I was like, this is great, you know, just to have a zine come through my door, and that is really, really intensive. And we realized that as it builds, you know, that to keep it real, kind of like in the kind of Constellation way they do, with all their, you know, keeping it physical and having everything built like that, to rely on people. We've learned to rely on people more and trust people like, you know, Andreas and people like that, and yourself, who can, you know, help support and promote and, you know, get it out there without it necessarily being me trying to send postcards to people. Because we, as you say, we make it difficult for ourselves. Some bands would just, you know, build a social media following, just send it out, and they'd probably have a much better reach, and people would be like, okay, that's cool. But yeah, it's just that commitment to where I think I've come from and where we've come from. And as I say, those things coming through the door just used to mean so much to me. And I've still got those from 20, 25 years ago when I'd sign up to a mailing list and a band would send me something. And so if that's what it means to me, I hope that means something to someone else, but it's the only way I can relate, and the only way I can be humble enough to want to communicate, you know, something which, you know, pushing something you do onto someone else, it's not always, doesn't always necessarily feel right. I mean, we live in a world now where people do that all the time, don't they? The internet as a promotions tool, as opposed to a communication or a knowledge repository tool. Like, it's just second nature. But for me, it's just, I'm just not quite there. So I need to find a way of being humble about it. I still think. I can't believe that anyone would want to be that interested in it. So I want to do it in a way that's, you know, I can accept, or that what I think reflects like SOAC's kind of artistic values, I suppose.
I'll look forward to the next postcard.
Yeah, there'll be another postcard. Don't worry.
Nick, I'm gonna stop the recording right there, but I want to say thank you one more time for taking the time out.
Thank you so much.
And for chatting.
Thanks for anyone who's got the interest, and thank you for your support as well. It's massively appreciated at the audience.
Right. Stopping the recording. Here we go.